And now on Nights with Steve Price, the Courses and Careers Show with Danny Bielik. Thanks to Management Consultancy International. Go to mci.edu.au.
Yep, Danny's back. He was in the Philippines again. You must be doing incredible business over there. Must be making a fortune, MCI.
Well, look, I don't know about a fortune, but as I keep saying to you, the Australian education system is so well regarded right around the world that there is demand for it pretty much everywhere. And, I don't think it's really appreciated. In fact, it's interesting to talk about that because one of the things that never happens is we never talk about education as an industry. We talk about education serving industry, but we never talk about education as an industry. And I think as an industry, it also needs the same sort of help and support and guidance that other industries need.
Well, we
were
talking to Steve Chobo with Andrew Bolt earlier in the program, and we were talking about the free trade agreement in China. Obviously, for education, that's going to be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. But as big as China is,
done your homework on that yet?
We've
lots of money to be made for MCI in China.
It's the old problem is if you could sell 10 cents worth of something to every person in China, it doesn't ever quite work like that. But as for every China that there is certainly India, which is doesn't make as big a splash in our newspapers. But guess what? A lot of their population speak English. You go to the Philippines. Guess what? A lot of their population speak English, and they understand our education system. They appreciate our education system. So there's plenty of opportunity to go around.
Well, speaking about education, we have a special guest in the studio tonight who's joined us, who is the Assistant Education Minister, Simon Birmingham. Minister, good evening. Thanks for coming in.
Good evening, Steve and Danny and listeners. Great to be with you all.
That free trade agreement with China is massive. Is education part of it?
Education is absolutely part of it. And in fact, I was just in China and Korea last week talking to their authorities and businesses there about education. We have around 150,000 Chinese students studying in Australia at present, paying their way and making an enormous contribution to our education system. There are around 35,000 students in China studying vocational education and training courses with Australian providers, including Sydney TAFE and Box Hill TAFE out of Victoria and numerous others. So it is big business already. It's our largest services export. It's our third or fourth largest export industry overall in terms of where Australia generates international dollars, and we need to keep building that sector.
So will Australian universities have a freer hand there because of this?
More Australian education providers, education and training providers will be listed on the Chinese government preferred list as a result of the free trade agreement, so it will become easier for Chinese students to study with those institutions. So we do get an increased access in that sense. And indeed, there's real enthusiasm from the Chinese authorities. I met with their Labour Minister and with their Education Minister last week. They recognise the value of Australian education. But the good news is, and the thing that listeners in particular would appreciate, it's not just about the dollars that we earn. It ultimately strengthens those cultural ties, those economic ties, those security ties, and makes the whole relationship richer and stronger in the future.
Well, I don't know if you've seen it, but it makes it even worse, that dreadful xenophobic ad that the CFMEU are running today, trying to suggest that because we've done this free trade deal with China, that suddenly we're going to get flooded with Chinese workers who are not skilled and they're going to work for less money than the Australian industrial system demands. And indeed, when you read the document that's been put together by Andrew Robb, it shows that there are absolute safeguards in there, and that Chinese workers coming in that are not available here will have to work under Australian conditions.
Indeed. Look, the union
campaign is disgraceful.
The union campaign is misleading and deceptive. It should be very clear to everybody that China will have exactly the same conditions in place to send workers to Australia under 457 visas as 150 other countries already have. That anybody who comes here will still have to be filling a demonstrated shortage in the Australian labour market. They will have to have the skills and qualifications to do the job. And if it's a job like an electrician or a plumber, they will have to have the same licensing conditions as anybody in Australia to do the job.
Well, you just wonder how the
will
union
and truly
got away
be the
with
exception, not the rule. And the shame of it all is that Bill Shorten was writing himself in the Australian Today, backing this xenophobic union campaign, that is putting at risk the relationship with Australia's largest trading partner.
Just ridiculous.
Steve, can I flip this on its head?
You can, Danny.
Imagine if you were to go over to China and have a union over there criticise Australian workers. We've got Australians coming in here, these overpaid people who do all these sorts of things and want to bring their bureaucratic way of life. Stealing jobs off. But, you know, equally they sit and look at these ads and don't think for one moment that the business captains of China don't see these sorts of ads, and they go, is Australia an unreliable partner in all of this sort of stuff? So the unions and business and government need to be working hand in hand to be able to say, you know, Australia is open for business and we are a reliable business partner to do business with.
Simon, great Labor leaders like Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, who've spent so much of their time post-political careers earning incomes from themselves trying to get China and Australia closer together, must just shake their heads when they see that stuff from Shorten today.
Well, that's just it, Steve. Look, the Labor Party throughout modern history has, to their credit, been pretty reasonable when it comes to trade and been very sensible when it comes to strengthening the relationship with China. What we see now is an absolute upending of that through this union-backed campaign. Now, I hope that this is just a short-term tactic of Bill Shorten's to get himself through the national conference this weekend, and that then he'll backflip on what he said today and run a million miles from this campaign.
He's pretty good at backflips, so I wouldn't be surprised.
But frankly, he should be bigger than that. If he wants to be the Prime Minister of this country, he needs to recognise that China is our largest trading partner, and the free trade agreement is great news for Australia, increases access for all manner of Australian products, including our education providers, and we should be welcoming it with open arms. 9:10,
Danny, we have the Minister in tonight to talk about the Industry Skills Fund.
Correct.
What is that?
So the Industry Skills Fund, it's interesting because over the years there's been on and off support for people who are in work to be able to gain access to training. And training could mean things like customer service training. We talk about customer service a lot here. It could be about learning how to do a BAS. It could be about learning how to create business plans. So it could be things like certificates and diplomas in business. Because a lot of people have expertise in a particular area, but often they need upskilling in certain areas. The government has historically been a partner in this and helped fund this. A lot of the funding has come and gone over the years, and actually Australian business and Australian workers don't know what to do and don't know where to turn to. The Industry Skills Fund is an initiative that was put out by the federal government and started at the beginning of this year. And I don't know that there's actually that much education about it, because in fact this is actually a good program. And it'd be interesting to hear from the Minister tonight, I thought, to talk a little bit about it.
Danny, Steve, listeners, the Industry Skills Fund is our government's policy to try to get away from what we saw was too much training for training's sake, and actually recognise that the people who really know the training we need in our economy to create more jobs and to strengthen the economic base and productivity of Australia are employers. So the Industry Skills Fund is a $664 million investment over the next few years, and employers are the ones who apply for it. The condition is that it has to be about lifting the growth potential and the productivity of their business so that they can create more jobs in the future. It's flexible about the type of training that it supports, but it recognises, as we do through our overall competitiveness agenda, that having skills is critical to growing the economy and to growing more jobs. So we want to support...
Is it working?
It's early days. We've only been receiving applications through the course of this year, but we're seeing some good innovative applications across all industry sectors.
Give us a practical example of how this works.
A good practical example is a New South Wales-based business whose application I saw today for expansion into the floating LNG sector. Not a sector that's happening out of New South Wales, but absolutely something that they can be a supplier of components and products into. So it's a small manufacturer who has the capacity to provide parts and equipment to support those operations out of Queensland. Mm-hmm. They want to diversify the skills base in their business to be able to do that, and that's exactly what we will help to support them do. A whole raft of other examples like that. So
give me an example of someone who worked in that company. What new skill would they be trying to attain, and what sort of financial assistance does the government give that employer to make that happen?
So in that type of instance, you would be looking at training around retooling or reskilling for the operation of the equipment required for a diversification of what they're undertaking. But in other instances, we have different examples where it's about accessing a new export market. And so a particular training dedicated to the language, culture or market environment in a different country that I've seen elsewhere in terms of getting exports, particularly to India, if I think about a different example. One of our first grants was in my home state of South Australia for the Golden North Ice Cream Factory, a good example of agricultural production, and in their case, again, it was about broadening their market reach. So sometimes it's product diversification and skilling the workers to make different products. In other cases, it's about strengthening the sales and marketing workforce to be able to sell products to a broader market. So all of those types of activities could be eligible. The key demonstration and assessment point is it going to help them grow the business and create more jobs?
I used to eat Golden North ice cream when I was a kid.
So there's a lot of
you should get back into it, Steve.
There's a lot of money in this. 664 million. You're trying to train up 250,000 people with this fund. I mean, that's terrific. But how does it actually work? How does someone? You've got to have a skills assessment, right? So someone comes into your business and has a look. How does that work? Who do they call?
So you can skills assessments are available by easily looking at the education website as the simplest place for a business to go. There are different skills advisors available across the country, some of them backed by industry groups like the Australian Industry Group, who can go in, give a business a free skills assessment. But probably what's really important to appreciate here is the business has to have skin in the game as well. So there is a co-contribution element to this. This is not free government money without any sense of industry investment. They have to put money on the table. There's a greater co-contribution required from big business, a greater government contribution available to micro and small business, which of course is consistent with the last budget, which really put that emphasis on small business growth and investment.
And this is interesting because you're talking about having this available to even micro businesses. So home businesses, handymen, tradespeople, people with a ute that go out and fix stuff. For the first time, these people are actually able to access some of this funding, and you will pay up to 70%. I believe, towards a certain amount of training for them. They're on the job all day. I went on to the education.gov.au website and downloaded a couple of these information sheets, these frequently asked questions, but there's not even a phone number. How do they then go and find out who can they ring? It says here, make an inquiry with the fund, providing the skills advice for them. I mean, who do they ring? How can the tradie tonight get up tomorrow morning and go, great, I want to get some training and get 70% of that paid for by Minister Birmingham?
Well, Danny, I will absolutely check that website in the morning, although looking across at the piece of paper next to you, I can see 132846 right down the bottom of it. So, hate to call you out on air there, but let me give your listeners that number again off of Danny's paper there, 132846 for all the small businesses out there.
There's a valuable lesson, Minister.
But should anybody have trouble getting through to that number, they'd be welcome to call my office as well, which in Adelaide is 0883541644, which was going to be my answer until I just happened to glance across the table and see that form. Sorry to call you out there,
and
Danny.
We'll repeat that number again for maximum effect. 132846.
More questions for the Minister in a sec. Well, we picked Danny up off the floor. He's got his glasses on now, so you're about to read your notes. You want to find out some more about this skills training scheme from the Minister?
Yeah, look, I think it's just it's an important point to note, I guess, Minister, that this isn't just for medium and large businesses, that it is for small businesses. What sort of training do you think that small businesses would get advantage from out of the fund?
I would really encourage micro and small businesses to access it. That's where it's most heavily geared to, with around 70% of funding available for those smaller businesses. And the opportunity for them is often for the business owner themselves to diversify their skills. What we know is that there are more business owners in Australia with vocational qualifications than there are with university qualifications. So an awful lot of the small business sector are made up of people who've studied trades or other vocational skills and have started their own business. And so often they're expert in their particular field, but to grow the business, they need to get a bit of marketing skills or sales skills or otherwise. And while it's not big enough to perhaps employ other people, they need to get those skills themselves. So what I'd say to a lot of micro and small business operators, the mum and dad owners out there, is think about investing in yourselves, upskilling your capacity a little bit, and using this fund to do so, because that could be the way you get to grow your business and hopefully employ another couple of Australians.
And a lot of that training, I guess, the important point to note for people is that training doesn't look like it did 20 or 30 years ago, where you'd have to take a few weeks out and close your business down for a few weeks while you go and get training.
Do it online.
A lot of it can be done online, it can be done in the evenings, and those sorts of things are available through the fund as well, aren't they?
They are, and in fact the training available is incredibly flexible. It doesn't have to be completing a full qualification. In fact, it doesn't necessarily have to be something out of the suite of registered training products around Australia. It can be non-accredited training if it stacks up and if it is genuinely something that can help you grow your business. So we've made this ultra flexible to help grow businesses.
In big business, you've actually prioritised certain industries, haven't you?
There are certainly growth sectors prioritised, agriculture, mining, a range of the sort of 5 key sectors we have that we can potentially grow our economy in that sense. And these are complementary to our overall competitiveness agenda, but they're simply growth streams that have a priority status. It doesn't exclude any business that can demonstrate their growth potential.
Interestingly, I didn't see education in that list. Is education considered an industry at government level for these sorts of things?
Education would certainly be able to apply. It hasn't been put on that growth stream list, which sits there as a number of, I guess, more traditional product-producing industries rather than in the services sector. But there's great potential in the services sector, and obviously we talked before about the enormous income we do generate from education, and for education providers, the chance is there to upskill themselves if that's going to help them grow their business too.
Simon Birmingham is the Assistant Education Minister. Danny and I had Christopher Pyne on a couple of months ago, a month or so ago, talking about the higher education reforms. You're going to reintroduce those?
We are. They'll be reintroduced, I expect, in the spring session. It's our intention to negotiate those reforms. Christopher Pyne, I know, has been back in touch with the crossbenchers, with the Greens, is expecting to meet with the new Greens leader in the coming weeks to talk about these reforms. They're really important to be able to give our universities the capacity to grow their funding base in the future, to specialise and compete with some of the world's best. We're not stepping away from these reforms. Everybody agrees that the current system is unsustainable for the future. What we want to have is a constructive conversation on how we can get these reforms, or a variation thereof, through the Parliament to give our universities what they need.
Gets knocked back again, it gives you a trigger for an election. Would you be happy to fight an election on education reform?
I'd be very happy to do so, but I'd much rather get the legislation through and actually see the reforms in place for our university sector.
Let me ask you one more question. If we just talk about vocational for a minute, we know what you want to do in higher education. More people do vocational qualifications, as you said, more business owners have vocational qualifications. Yet we have this completely screwed up system in Australia where in every state it's completely different. If I want to, anywhere in Australia, I want to do a bachelor's degree, I can get HECS or I can get fee help, so it costs me nothing at point of entry. I can start a course, costs me nothing, I can borrow the money from the Commonwealth. In an advanced diploma or diploma, costs me nothing at point of entry, I can borrow the money from the Commonwealth. If I want to do a Certificate 4 or Certificate 3, a customer service, a frontline management course, learn to be an electrician, it could cost me thousands in New South Wales. It might cost nothing in Victoria. It might be completely different in Queensland. And in South Australia, they took all the money from the federal government and ran. So what are we going to do to fix all of this?
Well, Danny, look, firstly, I just want to make sure that everyone appreciates we still have an outstanding vocational education system around
Agreed,
Australia.
100%.
The quality is good, the opportunity is great, and 1.5 million people a year vote with their feet and their wallets by paying for their own training. So that's very important to get on the table. But yes, the system is complicated and confused, and as the state leaders sat down with the Prime Minister today to discuss how the Federation works, there's probably no greater example of where it is crossing over one another and confusing for employers and people accessing training than vocational education and training. Now, I hope that we will get some good steps forward out of this federation process to clarify what the lines of responsibility are, whether that is done by one jurisdiction, state or federal, taking over the whole system, whether it is drawing some clearer lines in the sand about the level of qualifications that a separate part of government might take responsibility for, whether there are different models where we take responsibility for employer-based training and training dealing with people in the unemployment market, and the states run post-school training. There are a range of different options that I know were on the table for state and federal leaders to discuss today. I just hope that we will see through that process much greater clarity in the future that gives everybody certainty.
We appreciate you coming in. Just before you go, Bill Shorten tonight has announced that the Labor Party he's going to try and convince the Labor Party conference at the weekend that they should embrace your turn back the boats policy. It's a pity that they've come so late to that realisation that defeats people smugglers, given the number of people who drowned at sea, isn't it?
It's a great pity, Steve, and if only people could really deeply, truly believe it. Everybody knows that the coalition government is committed to policies to stop the boats and to turn them back where safe to do so, because we have done so. Kevin Rudd said much the same things as Bill Shorten did today. Kevin Rudd said them back in 2007 before Labor was elected then, and they simply did the opposite. Really, deep down, that the Labor Party is deeply, deeply divided on this. We will see that play out at the Labor Party National Conference this weekend. Who knows whether they will agree with Bill Shorten's statement or not, but what we do know is at any moment in the future, Labor could simply backflip on this policy again and open the floodgates to the people smugglers once more.
Simon Birmingham, Minister, thank you for coming in.
Pleasure. Anytime, Steve. Danny?
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks,
sure
Steve.
You get your eyes checked before you come back next week.
I will. See you next week.
Thank you. 9:30.